Welcome to Roger and Me, a celebration of the late, great Roger Ebert that aims to keep his unique spirit of film criticism alive by reviewing movies every week, just as he and Gene Siskel would, and Richard Roper would, and any of the guest hosts that happened in between. I used to say every Tuesday we'll revisit an old episode of the show and talk about those movies, and every Friday we'll review all the new movies. But the Tuesday portion of the show, since I basically had a schedule of the first, I think it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, and once those ran out and I had to schedule the rest of it, I did try to, and I had the first 3 or 4 scheduled, but every single one of them ended up not working out at the right time. So the rewatch element will return, and I'm going to get ahead of it, so when it does return, there will not be any gaps. But for now, I hope you're satiated with Mark Dujsik and I every week going Siskel and Ebert mode, as I've been known to call it, where it just means we're reviewing movies. All we're doing here is reviewing all the new movies that come out every Friday. There are many podcasts like it, but this one is mine. There are many YouTube shows like it, etc. But that's what we're here for. And this week, there are 9 new releases, if you count the one on streaming that we may or may not get to. Ooh, that's a little fun element to the show. Will we or will we not talk about a 9th movie? But there's definitely 8 movies that are out theatrically this week, and we're going to talk about every one of them. And I don't think we've got time to waste today, unless Mark has any housekeeping notes.
I have no housekeeping notes, except I think I'm the one who screwed up your Tuesday schedule because I was busy the one week. And so I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. That's the issue with doing this podcast. That's like labor intensive in terms of labor being watching a lot of movies. Yeah. And it's also, twice a week. So I'm driving myself nuts with the schedule. And it's insane of me to think anyone else would like abide that and want to also watch that many movies. So I don't blame anybody for the scheduling issues. Charles Bramesco was going to be on to talk about, we had a whole episode picked out, and I actually watched most of the movies for it. It was the week that Mamma Mia came out, which I think more famously is the weekend that The Dark Knight came out. Or if you're nasty, the weekend that Space Chimps came out. Or Trans-Siberian. It was a crazy weekend. But Charles had to go to TIFF Film Festival, so that didn't happen. So I'm just saying, we will do the rewatches. And tweet at me if that's why you're here and you don't care about this. I don't know if Roger and Me is the right place for Mark and I to be doing these reviews. Maybe there's a better place. But I'm happy here. I think Mark's happy here.
I am definitely enjoying doing this.
Great. Me too.
I've wanted to do something like this for so long. So
me too, man. I've done my little horror show, and I love it, and I'm still doing it. But I watch so much more than just horror movies. So it's nice to have an actual place where it's like, oh yeah, I have a show where I talk about everything, and I could, try to get that actual film critic status. I see everything. We're gonna do it. So let's start with not quite the biggest release of the year or of the weekend. Definitely not the biggest.
Definitely not the year.
Arguably not even the biggest of the weekend. Definitely not. But if this were the horror show, it'd be the biggest one. But it is a horror adjacent film. I'm not even going to call it a horror film. We'll get into that. It's Pearl, Ty West's, I'm going to say, stealth prequel to X that was filmed, like X was filmed. They took I think a 2-week break or 3-week break or something, and then they filmed Pearl. I was at a screening where Ty West explained all of this and how the movie came to be. We can get into that if we need to, but here's the trailer for Pearl, which again is a stealth prequel to a movie that came out this year. When did X come out? In like March?
It was 6 months ago. So
6 months ago.
I can only remember that because I wrote it down. So
yeah, so 6 months ago, X comes out. And 6 months later, we have an entire new movie in this quote-unquote franchise. And spoiler alert, they just announced a third one that is to be shot. Hasn't been shot yet. Called Maxine. So you can glean a lot from that title if you watched X. But here's the trailer for Pearl. This movie is so convoluted, just trying to explain what it is. But my wife went and saw it, and she hadn't seen X. And it works, I think, as its own movie, or does it not work as its own movie? Question to be answered in just a minute. Here we go.
Please, Lord, make me the biggest star the world has ever known, so that I'll make it far, far away from this place.
Well, caring for your family during these times is admirable, but you only get one take at this life.
If only they would just die.
Pardon?
Nothing. I want to be special, dancing up on the screen like the pretty girls in the pictures.
I will not let you leave this farm again.
Pearl, a film by Ty West, shot in, if this came out in the 50s, it would say in glorious Technicolor. Mark, what is Pearl? And I know we're going to end up talking about X, so give me your feelings on X at some point in there too.
Okay, yeah. So you kind of, I don't even know if you have to, but I mean, if you've seen X, all of this is going to feel a little bit redundant and a little bit, you know exactly what's coming, even if you don't know what the specifics are going to be, because Pearl is an origin story essentially of the main villain from X, who in X is this older woman who seems to be enraged by the very concepts of youth and all the promise that comes with it. And in this one, it tries to explain how that comes about. So Pearl, played by Mia Goth, as she was in the original. Spoiler alert for if you haven't seen X, but that was like a big surprise, is that Mia Goth was playing two roles in this, one of them under a lot of old age makeup, which was really effective. Just to kind of get at that part of it, at least. So Mia Goth plays Pearl, who is in 1918, I believe. It's going during the Great War and technically the Kansas influenza epidemic, the worldwide epidemic that killed so many people. And she has dreams of becoming a dancer, but her husband, who will later become her partner in crime in X, is off at war. And she's just kind of hanging out with her parents. One of them her father has suffered, it seems, a stroke and is, needs to be taken care of. Her mother is very Protestant work ethic, I guess would be the best way to put it. She's very much into that and doesn't believe that her daughter should be trying to become a dancer in the motion pictures.
Her daughter shouldn't be out learning how to dance. She should be home cleaning up her father who shit himself because he can't because he can't clean it himself. Yeah,
exactly. So basically Pearl just, eventually snaps, and that's really it. I mean, it is shot incredibly well. It looks gorgeous. There's this really, West is very, very good at setting up a shot and setting up a scare sequence and setting up all of that. And that opening shot of just this closed barn door, and when it all opens up and you see these bright colors and this like pink clouded sunrise or wherever it is, dusk, twilight, well, I don't even know what time of day it is, but it's like the perfect time of day to shoot this. And it's the farmhouse from X, but it looks, so much better in terms of its upkeep and everything. And you're like, yeah, okay, what are you going to do with this? So it looks great. Goth is quite good here. I'm not 100% sold on whether or not Pearl as a character really needs this kind of origin story. And I think that's my biggest issue with the movie, is that it just really feels as if it's the problem we have with all of the movies trying to explain like famous killers. Like, I'm not a fan of what Rob Zombie did with Halloween. I'm not a fan of any of the attempts to explain Leatherface or someone adjacent to Leatherface, and then you find out Leatherface was somebody else entirely. I'm not a fan
of
these.
That was a fun bait and switch. That's Lionsgate's Leatherface from 2017, I think.
It's awful. If you're curious, it's really, really bad. But I just have this issue, like, what are we getting out of learning the origin of these famous or, recent killers in movies? You just find out, like, there are certain things that make them snap, and that from the movies themselves that they're in. It doesn't explain too much. I don't know. It's hard to really get into detail without just saying exactly what happens in the movie. But I really feel as if everybody's going to know exactly what's going to happen as soon as you realize it is a horror movie, either from having seen X or almost like within like 5 minutes of Pearl. It makes it pretty clear that that's going to happen.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you're saying. The idea seems to be that Ty West, made X, which is like this homage to like independent film, particularly like independent horror cinema, like going in like a Tobe Hooper making a Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of thing. Like that's what that movie was paying homage to. And this one seems to be the idea is like, let's pay homage to like classic 50s Hollywood movies, like a Douglas Sirk melodrama, or even something like The Wizard of Oz, which I feel like is emulated pretty heavily here. But what if a Sirkian melodrama, but done as a slasher origin story? That sounds on paper like something that would totally work for me because I love both those things. But it really didn't work for me. It did surprisingly little for me, despite the fact that I think Mia Goth is wonderful and it does have its moments, in particularly a final shot over the credits that is just hilarious, but also just kind of proves the whole thing to be like a cheap trick and kind of like a gag. And I would say an argument could be made that this movie cheapens X rather than enhances it. But I would say it's more like harmless DLC, which if you're a video gamer, that means downloadable content, which usually means an add-on that didn't come with the movie, but that is like an extra level for you to play. And it feels like that. And Ty West explained it as such. Like he said, we were going off to shoot X in New Zealand. A24 had paid for, and we're making X. And he said, they had been out there scouting and making the sets or whatever. And he goes, it was such a fun experience, like getting everything ready for X. And we were like, it was just post-COVID, and they're like, we don't know when we're gonna get a chance to make a movie again. So what if we made a second movie that was kind of this origin story for Pearl? And you know what? Ty said, if A24 doesn't go for it, Mia, don't worry. We will have had this fun exercise where you and I wrote a backstory for this character, and we'll have that. And this was all before they shot X, so it's all like beneficial. And then it turns out they had, I think he said, a 2-week quarantine period when you travel to go do this. So he had that 2-week period, and she and him via Zoom or whatever wrote this together. And that, like, once you hear all that and then you watch the movie, you're just like, oh yeah, this reeks of a movie where they're like, well, we're already here and the set's going to go to waste and the actors are already here. So let's write something to get us paid a little longer, And like, it never really transcends this is an amusing pandemic era oddity. It just never quite justifies its existence for all the reasons you said. Like, I think it cheapens X because, like, I don't need the fucking origin story. I thought X did a great job of setting up its dichotomy between Maxine and Pearl. And, like, you got all that this movie's trying to tell you about Pearl in X. It just kind of feels like a laborious exercise to go through it all and be like, oh, well, Pearl kills someone with a pitchfork or whatever in X. So naturally, it's one of those prequel things where it's like, she probably did it before, right? It just feels like it's answering all these questions nobody was asking. Like there's a submerged car in the water in X that I always been like, it's an allusion to Psycho. The car is sinking in the water. Just like who cares? And then this movie, of course, you get the origin of the car in the water. And it's just, I totally agree. I wish I enjoyed this more. There are people who are calling this like gory and saying it's terrifying. And I have no idea what movie they watched, Mark, because I did not find this movie scary in the least. There's a notable gory moment, and it happens at the very end as like the transition into like the movie that we're expecting it to be, which is a horror movie. But like, it's definitely on an operative level, just trying to be this classic Hollywood movie about a girl following her dreams or something. But it's like, what if we did that and it doesn't pan out and it didn't work out for her? And it actually, like, what does it reveal about the industry? What is it like? That is a kind of a question I left with. I'm like, this movie doesn't reveal anything new about like, oh yeah, the Hollywood or whatever, quote unquote, the movies, the industry doesn't care about a person like Mia Goth. And the movie seems to like imply that she's bad, right? That she's like not good at dancing. Like her
It's hard
audition
to
is played
tell,
for
yeah.
laughs. It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if it was played. I mean, it is played for laughs, but like, is it played for laughs for us, the audience, or like the on screen, or is it played for laughs for them? I had questions about it. And then it also, you're watching a movie where someone's going to transform into a serial killer by the end. And you're like, what is the message about like people who are the jealous type who don't make it in Hollywood? Like they're all murderous people. It's just like, I think it was trying to be empathetic, but it ended up being like, not exploitive, but something, it rubbed me the wrong way. And
something's missing from it for sure. I mean, there is no, it's really difficult, except for the fact that she wants to get into the movies. There's really no connection between the filmmaking element of X. It's just about someone with a dream to get into the movies, sort of like the characters from X, but they're making a movie. And I mean,
this
it's
movie's
weird.
illusion, this movie's like love for film is displayed. There's a character who's called just the projectionist, and and it's like the first love of hers, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And like, he encourages her to get into the movies, and like you see the magic of movies via her seeing them. And like, I don't know, I just love all the elements of this movie. It's just when you're watching it, and it's just like you realize halfway through, or like when it's about to end, you're like, oh, this is really all it's gonna be, huh? Like, yeah, it really can't be anything more than that either. And I would argue my wife liked it a little more than me, which makes me think, would this work better had I not seen X?
I was curious about that because I saw on, you were on Twitter and you were saying that, you're going to see it with your wife who hadn't seen X, and you were trying to explain it. I'm like, I'm actually I almost tweeted you and said, don't explain anything. Yeah. I'm curious how it's going to play without any knowledge of X, because having knowledge of X, you are set up all the way through to know exactly what is going to happen to this character. Again, even if you don't know the specifics, and I like some of the specifics, I like the style of it. The performances are really good beyond Mia Goth. There's a really good Emma Jenkins Purro, I believe is how you pronounce it. She plays her sister-in-law. She's great in this. Mia Goth has this really long monologue.
That scene is kind of what took me out of it, really.
It goes on way too long.
It restates its point like 3 times.
Mm-hmm. But her reaction to that monologue is priceless. That was the thing that got me like, okay, that was the actual shot. That was the actual performance in that scene, is when it cuts away to the sister-in-law reacting to it.
I just thought that whole thing was so unearned, because like we're all waiting for that shot, and like he withholds on it, and then he gives it to you, and it was funny enough. But I don't know. I just wanted that scene encapsulates everything I wanted from this movie, and that I wanted more from it. And like, I get that the whole point of the movie is to have the facade and setting of this classic movie, and then to constantly subvert it. Like that opening scene, it's all beautiful and naturey, and then she like kills a goose with a pitchfork and feeds it to an alligator, and like that's the title card. And like that's a great gag, but like that is the movie in a nutshell. Like that's the whole thing. Is just like, it's gonna keep doing those things. Like, we're gonna present it this way, but we're gonna subvert it this way, and for given if you're judging it for what it is, like extra credit for X, like a bonus chapter of explaining more about this character for X, I think it worked. Like, it's okay on that merit, I guess, but that like inherently for me, I'm judging it like not as a movie, because I'm judging it as a movie on its own. I don't think it works as a prequel to X, because I don't think it needed it. And then on its own, I don't think it really adds up to much, other than you're watching a person like become like it's like Breaking Bad or something.
Except much shorter.
Much shorter.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it leaves a lot of questions. I'm curious about, X has the villains that are X. It's not just Pearl, it's also the husband, and that dynamic and that relationship. And this one sets up right at the last moment. It sets up a really tantalizing idea about what that relationship could have looked like in the past. And I mean, I hate to say it, but a sequel to the prequel, which explores that dynamic, might be more interesting than the prequel alone. I don't want to give anybody too
Yeah.
many ideas before we get, an extended universe or something, but an extended universe, if you will. It was right there.
Triple extended universe.
I
Yes.
didn't grab it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
this is somewhere between like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer and like some sort of satire about the business.
Yeah.
I just wish it amounted to more. Like I love all the ideas presented and like how it's a story about the people who don't make it in Hollywood and like just turning that into a sleazy, trashy movie. But I just don't think it amounts to much after all is said and done. And I'm glad we're going in this order because I think the next movie is oddly fitting. I actually saw it this way as a double feature, and I think it fits. Like you could watch Blonde from the perspective of, okay, so Pearl made it. Pearl got to the movies. Now, then what happened? So, arguably, Pearl's life would have been worse. We'll see. Here's the trailer for the going to be very controversial Netflix movie Blonde, which is a Marilyn Monroe quote unquote biopic. It is not really a biopic in the traditional sense. This is one of the first scripts I ever read as a paid script reader at an agency many years ago. And it is stuck in my craw, and I'm glad I got to see it on a big screen. And it comes to Netflix in a week, and it is playing exclusively in, I'm sure, New York and LA this weekend. But it's going to be on Netflix next week. Here's a trailer for Blonde.
How'd you get your start?
Baby, what start?
In movies.
Quite continental. But diamonds are a girl's best friend. I guess I was discovered. Men grow cold as girls. I know you're supposed to get used to it. And we all lose our charms in the end. But I just can't. Square cut or pear shape. I've played Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. I can't face doing another scene with Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, I'm excited to talk about this one. Mark, what did you think of Blonde? And then I'm going to ask you what you think of other Andrew Dominik movies, but I want to know about Blonde.
Blonde, the short of it is I hated it.
I expect the majority of viewers to hate this movie. I expect this to be the least finished movie on Netflix. People are going to start and not finish this movie in insane numbers that they will not tell us.
Yeah, they won't. They definitely won't be explaining those numbers.
It would be hilarious if they released the data. Like, here's where everyone dropped off in Blonde. I can predict a few moments.
There are a few. So Blonde has an interesting origin story in that it is based on a Joyce Carol Oates novel, which is
sounds feminist.
It's a fictionalized account of Marilyn Monroe's life, and in that I haven't read it, and I'm tempted to read it now after seeing the movie because I'm curious. It's apparently much longer. It sounds as if it gets a little bit more internalized in the character, and it's definitely going to be, I can tell you right off the bat, it's not going to feel as if it's trying to avoid being a straightforward biography. It's going to do a better job doing it than a movie that literalizes everything.
Yes.
Where you see Ana De Armas playing Norma Jean and Marilyn is going through all this stuff, and Bobby Cannavale is obviously Joe DiMaggio, and Adrian Brody is obviously Arthur Miller, and all of these characters and all of these movies, Billy Wilder is obviously Billy Wilder. It feels, watching it, that Andrew Dominik, who wrote and directed it, is making a biography. There's no attempt to try to fictionalize it in any way in terms of visual language or anything like that. And so you are watching this, and it feels very much like Marilyn Monroe's story as it's meant to be told. And that story in this movie is absolutely miserable. There is not a single thing of value to her character. The movie ignores everything about Marilyn Monroe that made her famous, made her popular, made her an icon that we're still talking about now, that they are making this huge movie about now, it ignores all of it and it turns her into a perpetually abused and exploited person who apparently, based on the movie itself, had little to no talent, and any talent that was there gets ignored by the movie. There are maybe like 2 scenes of an audition and 1 scene of her on the set of a movie, I think.
Yes, and then the audition scene, they make fun of how bad she is as a performer, and then say, look at her ass. That's what they say.
Exactly.
And
it
like,
turns into a joke.
Yeah, I mean, that is I know you understand that is what they're going for, and that's the point. But I know that doesn't excuse it for some people. I want to say about the book, I know someone who read it, and when I asked him about it after seeing the movie, he said that the novel more thoroughly insists that Marilyn Monroe was a genius whose talents were never fully realized. It actually had her talents on display, whereas the movie, you don't see that at all. I agree. No. If I have a criticism of this movie, it's that you don't see her talents at all, and the movie doesn't seem to. If you were to tell me that the director like thought she was talentless or something, I would be like, okay, like that's like sure, that was on screen in that way. But I feel like you could argue, again, this is the whole point of this movie is it's like a blunt force trauma of a movie that lacks subtlety completely, and like that is beside the point, her talent. It's just about how every man in her life used and abused her to such a degree. And I hesitate to say enjoyed, because it's not. It is a punishing and undeniably like a tough sit. Like, it's exhausting. But I didn't find it to be without merit, even if a lot of its revelations are like the opposite of revelatory. Like it's a movie where she's like referencing Dostoevsky or something all the time, and like we're constantly like giving lip service to how the movie is constantly. I would say the movie is constantly giving lip service to how smart she was, and how that nobody gave a shit, and how they all thought she was full of shit, that somebody else wrote those things. Even Arthur Miller, it implies that she like, stealthily helped him write and stuff like that. So I do think there's some in there where the movie implies that she was smart and talented, I guess. But the main drive of this movie is just that you're watching her from the moment she got to Hollywood. She's raped immediately by the head of the studio or whoever it was. And then
they try to play coy with it, like Mr. Z, and then they say the name like outright, like
it's
a couple
weird.
of like an hour later. It's
yeah. So I'm a huge Nick Cave and Warren Ellis fan, so I love the score of this movie, which felt honestly indistinguishable from the most recent Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album, Ghosteen, and actually Nick Cave and Warren Ellis' side project album, Carnage. It's all very ethereal and haunting and dread-inducing, and I love the score, and I think it's so fitting. But this movie is definitely an act of provocation that may as well flash "Does it offend you?" on like every other screen. And I'd argue that it works more often than it doesn't, but I can definitely see the argument against it. Just being like, what's the point, right? Like, is that where you landed? Like, why show me all this? Because like it's a biopic as told. It's like the third act of Mulholland Drive if it were a biopic. It's like Fire Walk with Me if it were a biopic. Like, it's Lynchian nightmare shit. And that's the whole point. He's trying to say, like, we have these like mythic figures in American culture, and like look at the real story behind them. Look how they were actually treated, and how like it almost would you say the movie like implicates it's trying to implicate the viewer and say the audience is like a part of the problem. And I think a lot of people hate the prodding of like a filmmaker like that.
I mean, there's an already infamous scene, like I think it was like immediately out of the Toronto screening. I think there was already an article.
Yeah, Bill wrote an article about it.
Yeah, there's an infamous scene which takes a sex act and pulls the camera back to have an audience watching it in big close-up view, just as we are. And
going like, wow, brilliant, and then watch that and going, wow, this guy's up his own ass, and like I can't believe this. Like I see both sides of it so clearly.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like Well, I mean, yeah, of course but we're watching the movie, and the movie is doing exactly what it's doing. It feels as if it crosses the line of trying to say she was abused and exploited throughout her life by her mother, who was mentally unwell and tried
It's
to
almost like
murder
she
her.
was fated. It was fated. Like
That's
from the
exact.
moment she was born, it
She was
was fucked.
born to suffer, and
Yeah.
she was born to be exploited, and it just dismisses anything of value to this person that she could have been, and she actually was, because again, we're talking about her right now as a real person who lived and did like some great things, and whose memory and image is going to live on long after we're dead, I think. It just feels as if it crosses that line, and it starts to become abusive and exploitative of this version of the character, who again, there's no clear cut line when you are making a movie like this and presenting it as a biography. There's no clear cut line between fiction and reality when you are literalizing everything on the screen. And so it feels as if it is a direct attack on Marilyn Monroe, on Norma Jean Mortensen, or Baker, however, I think Mortensen now. But it just feels exactly like the movie
It's
that the
doing
movie is trying to criticize.
Yes, it's participating in. It's hypocritical in that way.
Yeah, I really hated it. And I didn't quite realize how much I hated it until I started writing about it.
I found it. I find myself liking it more and more the farther I get away from it, because it was such like a revolting experience. That of course I was like, I don't know what to make of that, but I definitely felt a lot. But once you realize what he's doing, and like that each scene of this movie is like a recreation of like an iconic image from her life, like the 7-Year Itch subway grate thing, or the song from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, or there's even just a moment with her with Arthur Miller wearing this like blue dress, and like that's a picture that exists. And like I love that the movie is taking these moments that we all know and just shoving them in our faces as if to say, here's what you saw, here's what was likely going on under the surface. But like, and that's the problem, is that this movie's fiction, so like it's not that clear cut, but his point is clear, of like the point he's making.
But it's the same point over and over again for like 2.5 hours.
2 hours and 45 minutes or whatever.
And at that point, what is it really saying except suffer along with her, because she needs to suffer so that we can experience her suffering.
I found like the casting of Ana De Armas so interesting itself, because she lets her accent slip through, like, and I feel like it's very obvious and noticeable and purposeful in like this movie about performances and artificiality. Like I definitely feel like the movie's getting at certain parts, like that scene you're talking about, where we pan out and we're watching the audience watch the scene. That could be interpreted as like Ana De Armas just talking as an actress, like playing the role. And I love that this movie's so, I don't want to say experimental, but like avant-garde. That's almost the same word. It's just goofy in that way, where it's like, yeah, this movie isn't trying to be a traditional biopic. It'd rather be. It's like Elvis in a way. It's like the flip side to Elvis. Like Baz Luhrmann made a biopic that was about the industry and how it's lecherous or whatever, and he did it in his Baz Luhrmann way. And now we have this Marilyn Monroe one, which is done in an extremely nihilistic way, which feels very Andrew Dominik.
Yeah.
And you didn't find the visuals compelling, or like, I'm sure very well shot.
It's very well shot, but there's also,
there's also two CGI fetuses. Like, what the fuck?
Oh God, we didn't even talk about. We haven't talked about the
abortion scenes, the pregnancies that appear. I've seen people say they're like almost pro-life in their depictions.
There's a really, really bad moment that I didn't get to in my review, because there's so much to talk about in this. But there's a gag after she has.
Watch your tongue there. Gag. Yeah, no. What scene are you talking about?
Oh boy. So there's a joke.
Thank you.
Afterwards, and the song playing on the soundtrack is "Bye Bye Baby," and I rolled my eyes so hard that I'm surprised I can actually see straightforward right now that they're not in the back of my brain, because it is just atrocious. On a technical level, yeah, it looks great, but there are some issues here in terms of aspect ratio and when it switches from color to black and white to color, and why it does so. There's no internal logic, either narratively or thematically, to those changes that I could see. Sometimes the aspect ratio shifts are because of memory, sometimes it becomes of dreams. Sometimes it's just because Arthur Miller dropped a photo on the sidewalk, and so they have to show that in glorious widescreen when they've established before that it's all about Marilyn's internal life. It looks great, but there's no point that I could find to any of those stylistic flourishes.
It's definitely not for everybody. This is a movie that is like, every scene is as expressionistic as possible. It is just as bombastic as it can be. It wants to offend, and I think it does, and it's prods in interesting ways. I was struck by a couple scenes in particular. Like, there's a scene where she looks so exactly like Marilyn Monroe that it's impossible to tell if it's her or like a photo of her. And you'd think you'd recognize her, but as the camera pans in, you realize it's just a trick, and it actually is Ana De Armas. And I think that's like a very good shot that really gets at what the movie's doing, that says, like, you think you know, but you have no idea type of thing, where you think you know what this looks like, but actually you don't. And the whole movie's just constantly fucking with that idea. And I don't know, it's definitely an experience to be had. And I'm really glad I saw it in the theater. And I don't think, most people won't do that. And I do not think most people are going to finish this at home. It's definitely a tough sell. I don't know, man. I am trying to find the words. Did I write anything else down about this? All of our myths in America are based on horrors. And I feel like I wrote down it's almost Forrest Gumpian in its structure, in terms
It
of
almost is.
It almost is Forrest Gumpian, like, where it's like throwing her into like these situations. But like, she was, she actually did famously do all the, like, had that moment's real. Then she met the president. Of course, that moment, who knows how real that is. So, stating that it's not for everybody up top, I'm going to say that I cautiously recommend Blonde, but it's a movie that just beats you into a pulp with its message about, isn't it lonely being, an American myth? And I enjoyed the ride of being poked and prodded and made to feel uncomfortable. But I appreciate that so many won't. But I do think the film has artistic merit, which is where I think you and I completely disagree, which is fun. We don't disagree very often.
We don't, but we kind of, this one's, this one's going to be divisive.
I mean,
sure.
It's hard to argue that it's like, yes, of course, it's repetitive because it keeps harping on the same things, but it ultimately tells this story in such a grandiose way and like ties it into the cosmos. And like, I just found it so affecting. If you're in the bag for it, you will end up being like moved by it and haunted by it. And it'll make you think about, like, I mean, how many movies in the past decade or in the past few years even have been like, maybe the old days weren't so good. Like, that was Last Night.
This is like
Last Night in Soho, which I thought was horrible. But to me, this is like a better version of Last Night in Soho. What a weird comparison I just pulled out. Anyway, we forgot to rate the other one, so I'll do a quick rate. I know what you gave this. I love it.
Yeah.
Mark gives Blonde 1 trademarked Roger Ebert thumb out of 4.
Yeah, definitely not up.
Definitely not up. It's just the thumb. It's neutral. It's a neutral thumb. It is 1. When there's only 1, it is not positive. And I'm giving it, I'm going to go ahead and give it 3.5 out of 4. A very provocative rating.
What?
A very provocative 3.5.
Wait.
As I say, I've been sitting on it all day, or for however a day and a half now. Or I saw it yesterday morning. And ever since then, it's been just, eating at me in my mind. Like, I think I rated it too low. It's one of those movies that I know I'm going to watch again and have strong feelings about one way or the other.
Oh man, I wish I'd known you had that strong feelings. We would have we could have had an actual like old-fashioned Siskel Ebert debate here.
We could brawl. Well,
maybe after we rewatch it, No.
No, yeah. Let's go. I got my boxing gloves on, man. What do you want to
Yeah.
say to me?
I don't want to
Take
say
it.
anything to you personally, but
Yeah.
man, this movie is just, oh God. Oh,
My friend compared it, Jacob Knight, friend of the show, he was on the first episode. He said to me, we were DMing about it. He's struck by the similarities between Fire Walk with Me's Laura Palmer and Norma Jean, two supernova objects of obsession for every man they encounter, horribly abused by systems that should protect them, and in the end, undone because of their desire to break free from being coveted. There's a lot of good writing on this movie, and I'm excited to read it. Mark's review is great, even though it's a pan. You should read it. You should always read Mark's reviews, markreviewsmovies.com, and Mark Reviews on Twitter, and you can get on his Patreon as well. That's enough about Blonde. Let's get right into a movie that, spoiler alert, I'm going to rate 1 star out of 4.
Oh boy.
I fucking hated this movie about as much as you hated Blonde, if not more. And it's so much less offensive, but for me, it's way more offensive. Let's get into See How They Run, a movie, let's see, directed by an algorithm programmed to Wes Anderson? Huh. Just kidding. It's actually directed by a human person. Here we go.
Victim's name is Leo Kopernik, sir. Seems he was killed in the costume store. And then he was deposited here. Staged, so to speak. Sorry, sir. How much longer do you intend to hold us all hostage?
Or is that the idea? Gather all the suspects and interrogate each of us in turn until the mystery's solved?
Marvin Cocker Norris, overrated playwright.
Celebrated playwright?
Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I can't read my own handwriting.
There was an incident.
I'll kill you.
It's as good as a confession.
Let's not jump to conclusions, Constable.
What do we have here? Working late, huh?
He killed Kopernik to hush up the affair. Case closed.
So this movie is very on the nose about what it's about. It's a Agatha Christie style whodunit, but it's a meta take on it, where the characters in the film, some of them star in an Agatha Christie production. Isn't that fun? My problem with this movie, which I found absolutely excruciating and unfunny, it's so self-satisfied with its meta whodunit about a whodunit, and it's so try-hard, sticky bullshit that's tired from frame one, and I can't believe there's no twist to it beyond, nope, it's just a whodunit about a whodunit, and we're going to keep referencing things from whodunits and looking at the camera and winking. It's just absolutely insufferable as a movie. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Thankfully, it's like 90-something minutes, and it kind of flies by, but at least it announces itself as wink, wink, insufferable from the first fucking scene. So you don't need to waste your time if you're not on board with that, which I wasn't, but for the purposes of this podcast, I sat through it. But as I joked earlier, it's like an algorithm was programmed to make this by inputting Agatha Christie, Diet Wes Anderson, and meta. And I'm particularly struck by the complete and utter uselessness of all the attempts to add visual flair. There's like split screens that add nothing of value, like a split screen of a guy walking, it'll show you it from 2 angles. It's just so bad. The only laughs I got in this movie came from how badly those elements were deployed. I found it to be completely embarrassing. Anytime it is aping like a Wes shot or a Wes quirk, like someone's card or something, I just rolled my eyes. I just think it's such amateur hour, and I have no idea how it got made in 2022. It feels like, we're getting like post Knives Out murder mystery runoff still. We got 2 Kenneth Branagh Poirot movies. I'm sure there were other examples. We got this one, and we got the new Knives Out coming out. But man, I really didn't like this at all. I don't think it has anything going for it. Maybe a fun Saoirse Ronan performance, but I just mostly felt bad for her.
Oh, yeah, I really liked her in this. And I liked the idea of it a lot more than you. Because I think think I tweeted at you, like, direct message. I said something like that this movie should be like catnip for me. It's a period piece about the backstage shenanigans in a theater that is also a murder mystery, about how predictable murder mysteries are, and also how maybe people who are involved in a theatrical production of a murder mystery might not be the best people to try to solve a murder mystery. It feels like, I don't know, a Tom Stoppard play, which is kind of an on the nose reference. If you know that, if you're in the know, that Tom Stoppard basically wrote a play very much similar to this one, at least in terms of what it's trying to do. You understand why Sam Rockwell's character is Inspector Stoppard. There are a lot of in-jokes in here. A lot of them have to do with the very real production of The Mousetrap, which is still going strong in London's West End. And it feels as if you don't know that play, if you don't know the setup and the background to it, you are going to be lost in this movie. And even knowing at least some basics of these things, I felt lost because the screenplay does not set up properly anything in terms of its jokes, in terms of its satire, in terms of what it's referencing and why it's referencing it, and how it's making the connections between what Christie's play is doing, what the screenplay itself is doing, because there is a twist here, obviously, because it's a murder mystery. There's a big reveal at the end, and a key to understanding it is understanding the background of The Mousetrap. And there are just like throwaway lines about the inspiration for that play and all of that. And I feel as if either it's because they realize like we can't give too much away, or it gives away the entire big twist, or they just really didn't care that much, and they thought, oh, that's a popular play.
It's not a very good twist either.
No, it's not.
I didn't find it to be like a compelling, even Death on the Nile gave me like a satisfying, I thought, ending, or at least it worked out for me.
Yeah. I mean, well, an actual Agatha Christie mystery is going to end satisfactorily because she knows what she was doing. You could say she's kind of an expert at it.
Yeah, she's kind of good at this stuff.
Yeah. So when you
this movie seems to have a lot of fun with the idea of Agatha Christie existing and being a person, like she's a character in this movie technically, but like off screen or whatever.
What a great setup! What a great setup for the third act of this movie to actually have the author of the play who would be an expert on, and you don't do anything with it. It's more about like her archaeologist friend. That's such a weird scene. There's some, like I said, there's some good ideas here. In general, I think the performances are fun. You got, Sam Rockwell being just sort of like an absent-minded inspector, which makes a lot of sense, again, with the name of his character.
I love him a lot, but he did nothing for me really here. I just felt bad for everybody here. And like this movie's idea of humor is Adrian Brody saying like over narration, like you've seen one detective film, you've seen them all. And I'm like, okay, so you're going to like do something to subvert that, right? And like
you would think so.
You would think if you're going to call out specifically the conventions of these movies, that they'd have some way around escaping them, right? But no, the movie just is content to be like, isn't it so predictable? And then it just is. It's just, I can't believe that this movie exists as in its form, because it's just constantly winking, nodding, mentioning like, well, this is the setup for a murder mystery, isn't it? Here's a dead body. It's like, this would have been compelling like 50 years ago, maybe. Like, before, I feel like even in the era when these movies were made all the time, that there had to be a parody of these things already then. Like, it just seems so tired. I just can't believe. I would love to know why and how this existed. Did you also feel like a why pang? Or I guess it's all explained by Knives Out.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, I think the success of Knives Out is helping a lot. But also, I mean, Murder on the Orient Express, I think, did pretty well. When it came out. And I liked that one. Less Death on the Nile. I mean, I like these kind of things, but this one's just it sets up useless. So much, and it without actually establishing the things it needs to establish. You need to do a lot, and you need a much better. If you're going to reference The Mousetrap, you need a much better solution to the mystery than what they give us here. Because the joke is, one of the jokes that is never explained is that, The Mousetrap's a really good mystery. And it's got a really good ending that is intentionally never revealed by anybody, really. And so you really need to have something that at least matches or tries to match it. And this one doesn't come close to it. It's a bit too winky and naughty without really giving you a sense of why it's winking and nodding at that stuff.
Very unearned winks and nods there. 1 out of 4.
2 out of 4.
Very kind of you.
Yeah, it is kind. I like I said, I like some of the performances.
Oops, I am already jumping the gun here. We're going to get to the trailer for the next movie, The Woman King, a Gina Prince Blythewood joint. Let's go.
An evil is coming that threatens our kingdom, our freedom. But we have a weapon they are not prepared for.
My king, the Europeans wish to conquer us. They will not stop until the whole of Africa is theirs. We must fight back for our people.
Maneska, you are asking me to take them to war.
Some things are worth fighting for.
I really wanted to like this movie. I found that I really liked the director, Gina Prince Blythewood, most famous for what? Love and Basketball. And then she did Secret Life of Bees, which I think was also a hit. And then she did Beyond the Lights, which was not a hit, didn't make any money, but critics loved it, including this one. I saw it in theaters, thought it was great. And then I want to say her next thing, maybe there's something in between, but then she did like a big splashy Netflix thing. It's like that superhero, quote unquote, movie with Charlize Theron. It's called The Old Guard. And it had so much hype from people. And I just completely do not understand the love for that movie. I thought it was horrible. So my expectations for this were like whatever. And it's definitely not The Old Guard. It's definitely a better movie than The Old Guard. But The Woman King is definitely still like a 2.5 star at best experience for me. I really wanted to like it. It has all the like pieces of a good historical epic. It just also is like PG-13 rated and like doesn't go as far as you want it to and has very generic storytelling and relationship stuff. I wasn't as compelled by this as some of my colleagues were. What did you think?
I'm also mixed on it. It's man, it's hard to, I mean, it's an important story in a big way because we don't see this side of history portrayed in movies often, if ever.
Sure.
I mean, a few people are probably going to go into this like in terms of mainstream movie audiences knowing anything about the Kingdom of Dahomey, which is like the biggest kingdom, most famous contemporarily kingdom in West Africa, and or possibly even the entire continent of Africa at the time it's set, which is in the mid 1800s. And so I mean, it's, you know, it feels new and it feels unique and it feels like something that we haven't seen before, and that's great.
In some respects, I think, but then in other respects, it's like it's like by the numbers. I felt like.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, just the existence of the movie.
Yes.
It's a great idea. It's a great opportunity to see history that we don't get to see and or read about in textbooks or in the movies. That's great. The story itself leaves a lot to be desired though, because it is just sort of like a bunch of cliched situations. You have the coming of age story. You have a couple of training montages, because the entire setup, I mean, did we even get into it? Is based on this group of women warriors in the Kingdom of Dahomey who are, you know, in service of the king, and they are going around rescuing, at the time they are rescuing people who have been captured by this larger empire. I think it's the Oyo Empire. And they are trying to save these people. And there's some discussions about, you know, slavery at the time and the participation of certain kingdoms within and the influence that the Europeans have. There's a really succinct way of putting it that it's, you know, the slavery trade at the time within Africa and outside of Africa, it just became a vicious circle where in order to maintain power that, is within these, these nations that they, participated in it to get the weapons and ammunition and all of this stuff to be able to hold power over, other nations that are trying to kidnap their people to sell into slavery. It's really smartly done. It's a good piece of historical background. And it would have been nice if there had been some kind of story revolving around that, but instead it just kind of feels as if it sets up a couple of different conflicts. There's like a general who represents the larger empire that's trying to take Dahomey over, and he has a personal history to Viola Davis's character. There's just a lot of kind of generic melodrama stuff going on in the background that doesn't fit what seems like a boring grand attempt.
It has a very boring middle, this movie.
It does. It's setting up a lot in terms of history and in terms of characters, and it never quite pays them off in a satisfying way. And
it's a shame because the three, I would say there's like three really great central performances. Viola Davis is good. Duso Mabudu Mabidu is very good, and Lashana Lynch is great. But it's a bummer because like that's all I really have to say about it. I'm like, there's some good performances in this movie that has a pretty weak script, and like I see people talking about how like gripping and exciting and it is. I'm just like, I found the action so generically like poorly cut, and just it didn't have any impact at all. And this movie, like I feel like in Medieval, I said one of the compliments I had for it was like, even if you didn't like it, like it has really brutal violence that makes you feel like you're in the battle in a medieval time. And this movie is the most sanitized version of epic historical war fighting you'll ever see, probably. It just, you don't really see any blood. Yeah,
I wouldn't go that far. I think that there are some, gruesome moments that are at least suggested and sometimes shown. I think it kind of pushes the limit of a PG-13 to a degree, to a point. To a point where there's probably a director's cut that's going to add like maybe about 30 seconds of violence, and it's
let's do it.
Jump up to an R.
My star rating would go up significantly.
But I think it does kind of push the limit. There's some of it in there that's like, I think, but that's just me. I mean, on the other hand, I think that, going back to the MPAA, I think the blonde NC-17 rating is a joke, but
it's ridiculous.
I mean, they're so weird. It's like you have the suggestion
they really don't like
and
sex.
It goes up.
They don't
really
like
don't.
Sex,
but
and there's a simulated blowjob in that movie, so that's
this
enough.
Gets a PG-13, and I mean, whatever, it's fine. I mean,
I'm not trying to pick on the woman, but like there are so many people in my feed that I feel like I have to call it out as like there's so many people who are championing Jada Prince Bythewood, and I'm all for it. Like as I said, I really like those first few movies, especially Beyond the Lights. But like I feel like she's a great writer and she's good with characters and moments, but like I haven't seen anything that shows that she's like this amazing director that can like pull off something like this. Like I thought this lacked any sort of style to it. Like I don't know. I just don't see like the vulgar auteurists, Gina Prince Bythewood people. I just don't see it. But I'm open to the idea. But I think the script here is the biggest issue. The production design and like the costumes, all that stuff is great.
And it looks great in terms of that.
It looks great. I just wish I wasn't bored out of my mind for most of this movie. Maybe that's a me problem, but it's definitely a 2.5 star out of 4 effort for me.
Yeah, that's what I'm giving it to.
Excuse me, 2.5 trademark thumbs. Roger Ebert thumbs. I don't know if the stars are going to come at me. Whoever owns the star rating system.
No one owns the stars. No one.
The Cosmos are going to come after me. All right, we're going to talk about a movie next that I hadn't even heard of, oddly, until my wife saw Where the Crawdads Sing like the other day, like weeks beyond its release date, and came home saying, I want to watch The Silent Twins, because they showed a trailer for that, and I had never heard of it. And I was like, actually, I just got a screener of that this afternoon because Mark had told me that I need to watch it or whatever, that it's coming out. So I did. We watched it. Here's the trailer for The Silent Twins, which I'm assuming most of you haven't heard of.
Hello, June. Hello, Jennifer.
I've recorded some questions here, and I've left enough space for you to answer. What do you think of your new school? Which do you like better, sunshine or rain?
How was your day, girls?
He spoke to me, and then it was just less and less, you know?
If there's something you want to communicate, you best say it now. Jennifer, June, how would you describe your personalities? I think you might be a bad influence on each other. It might be an idea to split you up for a while.
We will move the girls into special education.
Why won't you say anything?
We'll get them to talk, yes.
Guilty or not guilty?
You need to take care of
You can
yourself.
at least say
You
something.
best say it now.
How do you plead?
They shall be institutionalized indefinitely.
Very intense trailer for a not that intense movie, I would say. I asked you before I watched it, like, was it any good? And you said, it's interesting. And I mean, after watching it, that's exactly what I would have said had you asked me. And that, I think, is like, it's kind of a damning thing to say about a movie, because it clearly means there's not a lot going for it besides the fact that, like, it had an interesting premise, but clearly it didn't realize it. Like, that's kind of inferred from that sentence. And that is what I'm saying. I found this to be so intriguing, an intriguing true story premise that I'll have Mark get into detail on because I'm bad at explaining things. It had some inspired visuals and quirky artistic flourishes and some good performances, but it's still ultimately like this kind of a mess that never really comes together, and you never get a sense of who these people were and why they did what they did. It's like a character study of real people that is disinterested in the actual people. Did you find that to be the case as well?
Yeah, kind of. I think it's interesting because it is a true story. June and Jennifer Gibbons were identical twins who at some point just stopped talking to other people, except they started talking to they talked to each other in private and away from other people. And they became, ambitious, aspiring writers. And then they were institutionalized as, in the trailer, and then other stuff happens. But, that gets into spoilery territory for a based on a true story drama. But it is interesting because I think it's trying to evade the big questions, because it is perhaps difficult to explain why these two people just kind of seemingly out of the blue stop talking to each other. The movie tries to establish this idea that they felt like outsiders, that they were bullied at school because they were the only two black kids in this school in somewhere in England. I think it's London, but I'm not 100% certain. Stuff like that. It's just, I feel as if it's kind of doing, since we're talking about Blonde again, it's kind of doing the opposite of Blonde, where it's, Blonde's trying to make everything seem miserable. This movie is trying to make everything that could be miserable seem a little bit better.
Seem nice. Yeah.
That
is a good insight.
Because it's more about their internal life and their creative life. And I did appreciate that. There are some really interesting segments of trying to show that imaginative, playful side to them. Like, it opens with the younger actors playing the twins doing like a radio DJ show and introducing the entire cast, including themselves. And it's a really cute moment where they're like, and introducing us, and they're so excited about it.
It's this unconventional quasi documentary approach that's like very intriguing up top. That's what I mean by intriguing. I was like, this is cool. I've never seen that before.
Yeah. So you have all these like moments of like stop motion animation where the stories that they come up with are dramatized in animation, and it's, I get what they're doing, where it's like this dichotomy of their internal lives were so interesting, but because of all of these external forces that got them to stop talking to the outside world, and they seemed antisocial and they seemed this particular way, but they really weren't. But it was just society or other people or something pushed them into this situation. And because of that, they could never achieve what they could have achieved. And I get the idea.
Yes, the way you described it sounds like such a good movie. And I wish that is what I saw. Yeah.
It's there, but the movie doesn't dramatize it enough. And by the time that it does reach that mental health institution where they end up, it does just become about this is what happened, and isn't it terrible, and isn't it tragic?
Yeah.
And it
sucks
doesn't
from like their perspective, like it's a bummer, and like I don't enjoy watching it.
Yeah, it just is such a dramatic shift that it doesn't quite work because the movie has spent so long
Like I
avoiding
get
that.
Yeah, it's trying to be like fantasy world, harsh reality, right? Like it's
Yeah.
trying to like do a dichotomy, but it doesn't do a very good job of highlighting that.
Yeah, because you don't really get a sense of the two of them. You were right about that. It doesn't seem that interested in them as people beyond their creative lives or how miserable things became. And it's that jarring shift. I think that it loses a sense of these two characters in between there. It's unfortunate because it is an interesting story. It would potentially be worth telling again with a better insight into the characters and maybe how they became this way. And I don't know, just something else, because it really does seem to be grasping for meaning and never coming up with much.
Yeah, I couldn't make head or tails of this one. I ended up giving it 2 trademarked Ebert thumbs out of 4.
Yeah.
What about you?
Same here. Two trademark thumbs. Yeah.
Now, this is one I want to say we're going to have a passionate disagreement on, but the truth is I saw it at Sundance, which means I saw it in January. And for the first time on the show, I haven't had time to rewatch the thing that we're talking about. I just didn't reach out for a screener because, honestly, I was so bored by this movie when it came out. And I'm very open to the idea that I completely missed the forest for the trees and completely missed the message of the movie. And it was like, movie 4 in a day where I saw 5 movies or something. But I'm going to let Mark speak about it for the most part. But here is the trailer for God's Country.
Did you see a red truck this morning? In the canyon. It was parked in my driveway.
Probably hunters, right?
I don't know.
I heard about you. Just didn't know it was this canyon.
Did they threaten you at all?
Not overtly, but I have definitely been made to feel threatened.
Where are you from originally?
New Orleans. I teach at the university.
Out here, things are a little different. Most folks, they handle this sort of thing amongst themselves.
I guess I'm not most folks.
Should we call for backup?
What backup? We've got 2 officers to cover 300 square miles.
I don't feel safe.
Mark, what is God's Country? I'm asking because it's been 6 months and I completely forgot it. No, the trailer does a pretty decent job of setting it up, but I'll let you.
Yeah,
continue.
I think you'll have a fairly clear reminiscence of it because it is a pretty simple, bare bones plot. It's Tandiwe Newton plays Sandra, who's a university professor out in somewhere in the American West among mountains, and she lives an isolated life in a cabin. Previously with her mother, who dies, who's already dead at the start of this movie. She's saying a final farewell to her mother as her remains are cremated. She goes home, and then suddenly the next day, I believe, a red pickup truck is sitting on her driveway. She leaves a nice little note saying, "I'd prefer if you didn't park here." And that seems to be the end of it. But then the next day, the truck is there again. And there's just this pair of hunters. They're a pair of brothers, and they find this route easier to get to where they're going to go hunting. And she doesn't appreciate the fact that they don't respect the rule of just, leave your neighbor's property to themselves, to your neighbors, and that's it. If they ask you to stop, stop. But they don't care. And so it is just this kind of back and forth of this
like
character.
A cat and mouse slow burn anti-thrills thriller is I think how I would have described it then.
Well, I wouldn't say anti-thrills. It is sort of slow burning, quid pro quo escalation of tension between, this woman who just wants to be left alone.
It's a movie about playing by the rules and people who don't. And if we're not playing by the same rules, we're fucked, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's it. And I like it because it is just, that simple of a theme, that simple of a premise. But I think the theme plays out well by establishing these characters and establishing this conflict, by giving you some sense of, Tendi Way Newton's characters. Like,
Yeah, she's like a black woman in academia.
Yep.
And how it's actually funny. I think I saw that at the same festival where I saw Master, which is another movie. It's like a horror movie about a black woman in academia. And it was interesting to see these at the same festival.
That would be an interesting double feature.
It would be, but they're very different movies. I'm on the weird, I think nobody liked Master, but I ended up
liked
liking
Master.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I liked it.
I thought
too,
it was
yeah.
really clever, and I think people are completely like rude to that movie for it's like switched to a horror movie in the third act, which was like kind of the point. Like I think people were I don't think people got what that was going for. But yeah, this is definitely not as bombastic as that movie. It's just slow. I remember being just bored. I wish I had more to say. I'm open to this movie being good, but Mark, why would you say is it worth me giving it a second look?
I think it's worth getting a second look. I mean, I think you have a grasp of, you said you weren't 100% sure if you knew what it was about on a micro level or a macro level of what it's trying to say, but I think you got it. I liked it because the approach to it is based on these characters. The way that all these tensions escalate feels logical and kind of insidious in a small, like, these people just don't like being told what to do. And Newton's character is very set in her ways based on her background, and you learn something about why she moved out to this remote place and what she discovered about what's, her ideas about what society is were, demolished by this one event. And then she comes here thinking, well, at least I'm not going to be bothered by other people in society, only to have something like this happen after the tragedy of her mother, after, all the stuff that's happening at the university, where there's this discussion of whose voices should be heard at an academic institution. It's just all of these things piling up on her. And you have the sense that the movie could tell you one thing about society, or it could go another way, because there are scenes where she kind of connects to people and people connect with her. And there are other scenes where it's just, some of these people are just not going to be, understand such a concept. And it feels like you don't know where it's going to go up until the very end. And that's all I'll say about the ending, is that I really did feel this sense of tension of like, what is this movie going to finally have to say based on this character that I've gotten to know, and I understand her logic and I understand her reasons, and I could see her going a certain way or going another way. And I believed the character, and I believed what the movie had to say as an adjective I won't say.
Sure. Okay.
As that lesson might be.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah.
I believe it. And
you're making me want to revisit it. So I'm going to abstain from rating it. You rated it 3 out of 4.
Yep.
Sounds about right. All right.
He's really good here. Very subtle, nuanced performance. Like just a lot of, just kind of getting into this internalized view of this character and how she's dealing with all this stuff piling up on her. Really good.
Right on. That's God's Country. It is out now. And also out this week in IMAX exclusively, I believe, is the David Bowie documentary Moonage Daydream, directed by Brett Morgan. It is not a typical music doc, and to its detriment, and you should praise it for that. I don't quite know how I feel about it at the moment. We'll talk about it. I just saw it yesterday. Here's the trailer for Moonage Daydream.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear.
Ever since I was 16, I was determined we'd have the greatest adventure that only one person could ever have.
I'm an alligator. I'm a mama papa calling for you. I'm the space invader. I'll be a rock and roller bitch for you.
And how about the shoes? Are those men's shoes or women's shoes or bisexual shoes? They're shoes, silly.
That was actually a pretty good representation of the movie, because the movie does feel like a jumbled YouTube clip rather than a cohesive narrative documentary. And clearly, that approach is working for tons of people who see it. I've seen a lot of people praise this as like one of the coolest music docs they've ever seen. They've had an amazing time watching it. I wish I felt that way. I just thought it was mostly very loud and very edited. Very edited.
You know,
together.
I'm older than you, right? You just sounded like the old man in this conversation.
I know. Well, clearly, I feel like I was almost dozing off in this movie, and then like it would be very loud. I'd be like, oh my God, this movie's. Can a guy sleep around here? That's how I'm feeling watching this movie. I don't know, man. I really don't. Brett Morgan is, I feel like, known for like letting his subjects speak for themselves. He doesn't have like talking heads, and that means basically Brett Morgan got through the Bowie estate, I guess, like all the footage that he sifted through for this movie. It took 5 years or something to get through all the footage. It took a full year just to like digitize it all, and it's exclusive footage that we've never seen before, a lot of it, and he tries to use it in like this, I would say, borderline experiment. I don't know how to describe a documentary like this. It's experimental in that it's just like, here's a scene, here's a clip from a talk show, here's him on stage, here's him on a different talk show, here's him in a movie that he starred in with narration over it. It's just...
Here's a clip of Plan 9 from Outer Space.
There's a clip of Plan 9 from Outer Space. There's a lot of clips. There's a clip from like Nosferatu in there. It's just like this multimedia art installation of a movie more than like a compelling doc that like held my interest for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I don't feel like I really learned a lot about David Bowie. I love David Bowie. I love his music. I think he's an interesting person. And I think this movie is just like so interested in like trying to like sum him up. You know what I mean? Like using his own words to sum him up. And what is David Bowie about? What does he mean? And I just think it's so involved in trying to tell some sort of story through the editing that the actual interesting stuff gets lost, I guess. I really enjoyed, of course, seeing all the concert footage. It sounds and looks great, but it's not enough of it. And it just felt very like YouTube compilation rather than like a documentary that's like well directed and is going to win an Oscar or something. It didn't really work for me.
Yeah, to praise it right off the bat, the music is great. And I'm not just talking about the Bowie song. I'm not just talking about the Bowie song. I mean, there are new versions and mixes of Bowie songs that, you know, are really famous. There's this really fantastic way that, you know, Morgan and his team put together studio recordings and live performances. And I don't even know if it's a single live performance or multiple ones. It's hard to tell because there are clips from multiple performances when some of these songs are playing, but the mixes are really, really fantastic. I love the version of Heroes in this. I might like it a little bit more than the studio version because it does meld the studio version with this live, almost improvised. It feels like the band is just like riffing on these certain things when it's playing. It works really well. That's what I'm gonna say. The music's great. The concert footage is great.
A great performance of all the young dudes. Early on, which is like, you know, the song David Bowie wrote and gave to Mott the Hoople, that I think is famously on the Juno soundtrack. But
they did. There's a Beatles cover in this that I had never heard before, which is great. I mean, if you're here for the music, you're gonna really enjoy it. And if you're here for a biography of David Bowie, you're gonna kind of get it. And because it does, as much as it goes, it feels like unmoored from time. There's no set timeline, but there is also a very strict timeline in that here's young Bowie just starting off, and it goes from there through basically I think the 80s, and then it kind of stops and fast forwards really quick to suggest that, oh yeah, he also kind of kept working and, you know, eventually died. And it just, so there is a straightforward biographical movie in here, but it doesn't really care about that. It really cares about what Bowie had to say about life and art. And the way that some of those interviews are just cut together, and sometimes they also don't feel like they're connected to any specific period in his life, because there's a very tricky way that Morgan cuts to make it seem as if he's evolving or changing his views, but you never really know, because don't forget, Bowie's famous, and they keep bringing it up in these interviews. Bowie's famous for, onstage personas,
Yes.
and incorporating those into public appearances. And so it just feels kind of like you're just fooling with us to make a point about life and art. And I think that's the big problem with the movie, is that it feels like a Brett Morgan movie, an experiment, and it doesn't feel like a David Bowie movie. Too often, it does not feel like a David Bowie movie. It feels like Brett Morgan playing with form, playing with editing, doing a fine job with it, but concentrating more on the tricks he can pull off than on telling a story about David Bowie and his influence, and giving us what we really want, which is the music and the concert.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Like, it's kind of deceptive in its editing, and I think it was at a Q&A where Brett Morgan revealed he doesn't even like David Bowie that much. And like, I think that kind of says it all. Yeah, I don't know. I really wanted to love this because I love Bowie, and I wanted to take my wife to it, but the runtime and people telling me it wasn't good kept me from like making it a date night. And I'm glad I didn't, because I feel like she wouldn't have cared for this very much. But now I'm my wife is giving phantom reviews on the show, even though she hasn't seen things. So I'm giving it 2 out of 4. Maybe 2.5. I don't know. 2.
Yeah, I'm giving it a slightly more generous 2.5, just because I think the idea behind it is intriguing, and I mean, every single time there's music playing, which is a lot, I was, at least hooked on that level.
I was definitely happy at those moments too. I was enjoying those moments. It's just a lot to ask 2.5 hours of this type of thing. The next movie is something that I'm also surprised exists and is getting a theatrical release, and I hadn't even seen this trailer or heard it was coming out, so it's always a surprise. But here is the trailer for Confess, Fletch, which, yes, is the third Fletch movie after 2 in the 80s starring Chevy Chase. This one stars Mad Men's John Hamm. Here you go. Confess, Fletch.
My father's paintings were stolen. The Picasso was appraised at $20 million.
Well, that hardly seems worth stealing.
You're not a detective.
But I was an investigative reporter. It's an occupation that's been cheapened by the digital age, like president.
Earl Maurice Fletcher?
They caught me in the middle of a yawn. Can you imagine that?
Who killed this young woman?
I think the victim interrupted an art theft.
Your fingerprints are on the murder weapon, and someone matching your description was seen with the victim. Come back with me to police headquarters.
I get it. You want my help? Okay. Hey, guys, is there a way we can call in a coffee order? I'd kill for a macchiato. Not literally.
I looked into your criminal record.
And?
You're a bit of a shady character, Mr. Fletcher.
But I am adorable.
If you did kill that girl, do the right thing and give me an exclusive.
Let's talk about the suspects.
The Countess de Grazia married Papa for his money. Somehow she's involved.
Fletch, you're trying to seduce me.
Quite the collection of impressionists you have here. Those are reproductions. That's how we introduce my children.
The trailer, I will say, makes John Hamm look less funny than he is in this movie. I think he's very funny. I think that trailer is kind of awkwardly cut. Something that comedy fans, especially like Comedy Bang Bang podcast comedy fans, something comedy fans have known for a long time is that John Hamm is naturally hilarious. Very funny guy. You'd never know it from his several comedy films that he starred in, but he's a very funny guy who has yet to star in a good comedy. And I think finally he's in a comedy that knows how to use him. And I quite enjoyed this movie. I hadn't seen a Fletch movie. I know they're like, some people who grew up in the 80s, definitely like a soft spot for those movies, and for a time when Chevy Chase starred in movies. I know a lot of people love them. So I actually watched the original Fletch right before it just to see what I was getting into. And I enjoyed that too. But I would say, how many situations in life would John Hamm replacing Chevy Chase not be an upgrade? Because I think it's an upgrade, an undeniable upgrade. But it's a different take on the character. And from what I understand, it's Fletch is based on a series of books. And I think, to me, they play like Philip Marlowe style noir detective stories with like, you know, a sense of humor. And, you know, the Chevy Chase ones were heavy on like disguises and him like pretending to be other people. This one kind of loses that and is more in the vein of like an actual Philip Marlowe thing, actually. What did you think of this movie?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by it. I was not really expecting anything because I mean the last Fletch movie was I think in '89.
Yeah, nobody liked
and
it.
It's
Fletch
and
Lives.
it's bad.
Yeah, it sucks. Allegedly.
bad?
I haven't watched Fletch Lives yet, but it's on my
it's
hard
bad.
drive.
Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, the first Fletch is good, and I mean, you know, Chevy Chase is great in that role. But this one, you know, I mean, John Hamm is quite good here, and he works because yeah, he does have this kind of deadpan, smartass way of going about, but he's also naturally charming. I mean, that's the line. I'm also adorable. I mean, he is. He's really charming guy, which you know Chevy Chase doesn't quite have that quality intentionally. That's his persona. But you know, John Hamm plays this character who is an amateur investigator, but mostly a con man, because he doesn't do disguises. What he does is in this one is he just goes around telling people kind of what they want to hear and saying, I'm this person who feeds your ego, basically. Like he pretends to be a style editor for, I think it's the ex-wife of one of his suspects. So, and because she's just obsessed with being famous and everything, that she just buys it because that's what she wants to hear. And I like the character and I like the idea behind the character, and the movie just lets the character be the character in a decent mystery, which is key because the mystery is important.
It's like Shane Blackian or Soderberghian in a way, but I think that's giving it a little too much credit, but like it's trying to be something like that.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a fine mystery. All the pieces connect.
I agree.
All the pieces, and that's I mean, that's better than you could say for another mystery that we covered. It's better than the mystery and see how they run. It makes more logical sense. It has a more specific tone to it. And then John Hamm is just right here. And you know, a couple of actors could play either side of this character, but I don't know how many could play this character to be smartass and charming in equal measure as he does.
Yeah,
it works. I mean, that's the thing.
It's a great pairing. Like you read that this was like a passion project for John Hamm, and he like begged Greg to make it, and you're like, yeah, I love that he cared about this character enough. He knew he could pull it off. He knew this was actually a role that is for him, and I think he was totally right. His instincts were totally right there. Yeah, I enjoyed this. There's not a lot to it. It is exactly what it says on the box. It's like a new Fletch detective movie starring John Hamm. It has a lot of funny side characters. Anna Mumola from Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar as the neighbor has a very funny scene.
Yeah.
Roy Wood gets to play the straight man, but it's nice to see Roy Wood, the comedian, in this. I thought this was a lot of fun. I see some people overrating it in a way that I'm like, I wish I liked it that much, but like I did enjoy it. It's just like it's like lower key than like it's just too low key and like nice to like be like, oh, that was great. Like it was like, yeah, it was okay. That was pretty good.
I mean, I can see that though, because it does feel refreshing. It just does feel refreshing to have like a solid comedy mystery that we get where it's just about like eccentric personalities who are literally, you know, actually eccentric, and you know, a main character who's funny and, you know, kind of smart, but also I like that he can screw up, and the movie acknowledges like he's not really a professional. He doesn't quite know what he's doing. It's just, I mean, it just feels refreshing at a time.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a really great interview between Vadim Rizov and Greg Mottola on Filmmaker Magazine about the project and how it came to be. I really enjoyed reading that. So shout out to that. And are you tired? Do we want to cover the 9th movie?
I'm good to go if you are. That's up to you, though.
We'll do it.
You're the host.
Here's the trailer for the I want to say the 7th or 8th movie that Naomi Watts is in. That's an English language remake. It's definitely the second horror one I can think of. She did Michael Haneke's Funny Games, which was a shot-for-shot remake. And now this is an Austrian movie from 2014 or 15. I don't remember. It was called Goodnight Mommy. I didn't love it then, and let's find out if I loved it now that it has Naomi Watts in it and a language I understand. Let's see.
I hate that you have to see me like this, but it's nothing to be afraid of.
Dad didn't say anything.
I was hoping this could be our little secret. What do you think?
What do you think she looks like under there?
House rules. No running or shouting in the house. The barn. And my bedroom. Off limits.
Did you see the original?
I did.
Did you like it?
I did. I saw it twice, and I liked it both times.
So that's important because this movie has a twist in it that once you know what it is, arguably it could ruin the experience. So you thought that the original worked on its own merits.
Yep.
Okay. You didn't like this one, I take it.
I did not. No, I did not.
I agree. I think this movie, if the original was to me a 3-star movie, like just okay horror movie, this is like a 1.5 star version of that. It's like they took all the horror stuff that worked and made it the memorable, scary movie that it is, and just fucking took it all out. I have no idea who this movie is for. It's like a sanitized. I mean, I guess I understand who it's for. Like, it's supposed to be. It's clearly trying to be a audience-friendly, mainstream version of this twisted horror story. But then again, I ask, who is that for? Like, who wants the version of the horror movie that's less scary and less disturbing and more what? What do you gain from this version? That it's nothing. I think it's trying to be more of a psychological thriller or something, but that kind of upends itself. If you know the twist going in, which probably 60-40 of audiences probably know what it is. And the other 40 will probably know what it is anyway, because the movie is so bad at like pretending it's a twist. I thought the same. I had the same problem with the original, to be honest with you, where it's like pretty obviously telegraphed. But this one, I feel like maybe I'm just I can't see the movie without knowing it, so I'm just projecting. But it feels like the movie's not trying very hard to hide what's going on. What do you think?
Yeah, so to be honest, I kind of forgot about the twist, the big twist in the original, because the stuff that happens
it's not the point. It's not like the operative. Yeah, it's not like what's memorable.
That's what's the big differences between these two, is that what shocks you in the original is what happens before the twist. There's an extended climax here that's just terrifying. In the original, again, I need to clarify that in the original, because this movie is the neutered, watered down version, as you said, of the original, where it takes all of the psychological elements and removes them. I think because if I remember correctly, the original has a lot of silence, because that's kind of the key point, is that the mom character in that one wants some peace and damn quiet for once. And so the kids are being quiet and they're scheming and they're trying to figure out what's going on with this woman who they come to suspect. This is the plot. These kids come to suspect that their mother, whose face is wrapped up in a bandage mask, isn't actually their mother. And so they come up with these plans to try to figure out who this woman could actually be and what happened to their mother. And in the original, it's all about like the kids kind of scheming in silence while the mother is just going about her business. And you get this sense of like, yeah, I can get these kids being anxious about it because it's kind of scary not to recognize your mother. And you can also understand the mother just wanting to be free of the kids for a little bit while she's recovering. And just in general, there's this nice little level of sympathy for both sides of it. And so that makes the big climax even more horrifying. And all of that movie, I think, gets removed.
Yeah, that movie has like themes and ideas, and like you get why the kids think she's not their mom, and you understand why she is so like, quote unquote mean potentially in the kids' eyes or something. In this one, it just tells you everything. Like the dad drops off the kids in this one, which is already like completely different and like not as destabilizing as the movie opening with the kids in the house with her already, or whatever it is. I just can't believe you take something like this property that the whole selling point for the horror crowd is like how deranged it gets by the end and like the things the kids do to the mom, and then just completely whiff it. Like they removed it. Like what? Like
they did. Yeah,
it's gone. It's just not there anymore. And what's there is not scary or compelling or interesting. Just a total whiff of a remake.
Yeah. Completely removes the entire point and what made the first one scary. And it does, unfortunately, because they get rid of all the stuff that is terrifying in the first movie, the whole thing becomes about the twist by the end. And that twist is not good. Like I said, I forgot about it. As memorable as you might think it is predictable and generic it's as predictable and generic of a twist as you can get. And I just forgot about it because it didn't matter to me. And so having it be the big cornerstone of the ending here just is a big letdown.
There's just, the first one had like a primal fear to it that this one just doesn't have at all. So therefore there's no thrills, there's zero tension, and all you're watching is like a mildly messed up story. Like it's just not that, like it's once you remove that stuff, there's no reason to even tell the story. It just, go watch the 2014 movie if you're at all interested in this. And I'm trying to think of more. Naomi Watts, Funny Games was a remake. The Ring, another horror remake. That's another horror remake she starred in. So she's officially the scream queen of foreign to U.S. horror. King Kong. Technically, you can call that a horror movie. If you want to.
I would call the original Kong
definitely a remake. Yeah. She does a lot of remakes. She loves them. This is definitely on the bottom of the pile for me. I'm almost impressed with how bad it is, though. Like you took something that I kind of liked and made me really not like it. Like, I know I said I didn't like it initially, the original, but like I liked it enough to give it 3 out of 5 and say like I recommend it for horror fans, but I didn't like it for these reasons. I thought the twist didn't work or whatever. But man, it still has that dread, and like it's a horror movie where this is like some sanitized, glossy Amazon Prime well shot version. Not well shot, but like a commercial. It's like a TV commercial or something. It feels wrong, and it's not good. And I wonder if it'll be another 15 years before we get another English language remake of a foreign film starring Naomi Watts as a mom in which she is bound and gagged with duct tape in her own home.
We'll find out.
Maybe.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, see you in 15 years. We'll answer that question. Thanks for listening to us review 9 movies in an hour and 40-ish minutes. We'll be back next week with 1 movie. Just kidding. There's like a couple, but it's mostly Don't Worry, Darling, and which has no peripheral story to talk about outside of the film. There's no public relations disaster going on with that movie or anything. So that's next week. And is Smile next week? Did Smile get moved up?
Did it?
According to IMDb, it is now coming out. Oh no, IMDb must have mislisted it because the poster says the 30th. IMDb says it's now out on the.
And 23rd. I'm not seeing it until the week of the 30th. So yeah,
I'm seeing it. I believe the week. The 26th is when the screening is. Is that right?
I think.
Yeah, they sent me a screening invite. Yeah, it's the 26th. So we'll be talking about that the following week. But next week is Don't Worry, Darling, and you said there's a couple more.
Yeah, there's a couple. We'll talk about it off. We'll do some behind the shot.
I mean, that's how slim pickings are. We got to talk off mic and figure this shit out.
After this week, I'm good with 2 or 3 movies. That's fine.
Yeah. Maybe we can review the re-release of Avatar. Talk about what we think of Avatar. All right. This has been Roger Ebert and me with Brett Arnold and Mark Dujsik. Goodbye.
The show starts in 1... Silence. Shut up. Hush.